the rent. So a couple of pointers. The parties to the contract should have approved the contract and they are committed to meeting the obligations. The entity can identify each party's rights regarding the goods or services. You can identify the payment terms, right? And the contract has commercial substance. And when do you say that a contract has commercial substance? If the risk, timing, or amount of reporting entities, future cash flows will change as a result of the contract, which basically means contract mein there has to be a commercial substance slash consideration for it to become a contract. And it is probable that the entity will collect the consideration to which it will be entitled. So the chance of you collecting the consideration under the contract has to be more than 50%. Only then you could say that there is a contract in existence. The second step is to basically identify the separate performance obligations. What is a performance? What is an obligation? An obligation is a compulsion to do something. Obligation is a compulsion to pay in IAS 37. यहाँ पे it is a compulsion to do something. ठीक है. Now you could have one single obligation or you could have multiple performance obligations. If I tell you that the total fees for the AFM batch is 18,000, it will include regular teaching, revision, and mock feedback. So there are three separate performance obligations. I can sell these separately also. I can sell these together also. So if they are sold together as a combined price of 18,000, that doesn't mean that they are merged into one obligation. They are still very much three separate performance obligations which can be done independently, and it is not necessary for you to sell them as a bundle. ठीक है. एक बार ये ऑरेंज नहीं, ब्लू रेड ग्रीन पढ़ो तो एक बार. ठीक है. Okay. Then the okay. Before we go to the third step, let's have a quick discussion on warranty and extended warranty. What is warranty? A warranty is an assurance. It's some sort of a guarantee that the product sold will not get damaged during a particular period. And if it does get damaged, then the selling company will repair slash replace it free of cost. So if it's a free warranty, what you do is आप जो उसका create a provision for the expected amount that you will have to incur in the future. If it is a paid warranty, okay, if it is a paid warranty, then when you receive the money from the customer, you record the entry bank account debit to deferred revenue, and as the time passes, because this is a performance obligation satisfied over a period of time, as the time passes, you transfer the proportionate amount to your profit and loss account. Transaction price is the amount of consideration which the entity expects to be entitled in exchange for transferring promised goods or services to a customer. Okay. Consideration is something in return, something in exchange of providing the goods or services. Now, if you remember, there are four aspects of consideration or transaction price that are there in your SBR syllabus. What are these four? One is variable consideration. Second one is significant
Non-cash
financial component. Then non-cash consideration and consideration payable to customer.
customer.
If it is consideration payable to customer and if it is for a specific good or service, so what will be the accounting? Who can tell me? Uh, Simrose, tell me if there is consideration payable to customer for a specific commodity or service, तो accounting कैसे होगा?
So will it purchase entry?
Very good. So separate entry for purchases, you will treat it as a separate purchase altogether. ठीक है. Then what do we have apart from this? We might have a situation of say significant financing component. तो उसमें आप क्या करेंगे? You will take the present value of amount payable after 2 years. The present value is revenue. उस पे आप unwinding of discount करेंगे. The amount will go to finance income, right? There's a distinction. Your main job is not to provide these deferred payment services. So any money that you collect for that goes to your finance income. ठीक है? Non cash consideration होगा तो fair value of the item on which date?
Transaction date.
On the transaction date. Have we seen a question related to this? Yes.
Yes.
Wire company. वहां पे है ना, which date should you consider the value for? Correct. And now variable consideration. Variable consideration should be included in transaction price only if, what are the specific words of the accounting standard? Do you remember?
Yes, if it is highly probable that a significant reversal in the amount of revenue recognized will not occur when the uncertainty is resolved.
Only when there is a high probability that a significant reversal in the amount of revenue recognized will not occur when the uncertainty is resolved. ठीक है? So there are four aspects. Now what I'm going to do is I will let you read the necessary stories and explanations that were written here. ठीक है? And see how that can be incorporated later in your answers when you write it in the exam. एक बार ये पढ़िए, read the situation. Don't read the provisions of the standard, read the situation. Tell me when you want me to scroll. Tell me when you want me to scroll.
So please go.
Done, sir.
Okay. चलो. What next? ये right to return comes under variable consideration only, right? Now, if I were to talk about second step तो हो गया अपना consideration payable to customer, non-cash consideration and all of that. What about the fourth step, which is allocation of transaction price? Now, if you have a bundled service that is being offered, can you tell me something as a step that we need to perform for allocation of transaction price? In what ratio should we be doing it?
Based on the standalone selling prices.
In ratio of the standalone selling prices. Okay. Now, discount also has to be allocated in the ratio of the standalone selling price. Now, the fifth step, which is revenue recognition, there are two aspects of revenue recognition that are critical. The first one is that revenue recognition has to happen on the basis of whether the performance obligation is complete. Now, a performance obligation could be completed at a point in time, or it could be satisfied at a it could be satisfied at a point in time, or it could be satisfied over a period of time. Now, under what circumstances will you say that a performance obligation is satisfied over a period of time? Question one. Question two, tell me, uh, is there a sequence? What should you check first, over a period of time or at a point in time?
Over the period of time.
First of all, you should check over a period of time. Okay, not at a point in time. You should check over a period of time. Okay. Now tell me something. If you want to see whether a performance obligation has been satisfied over a period of time, there are three conditions that you need to check. And you have to satisfy only one of these three. Can you tell me what the three conditions are? Tell me, who can tell me the three conditions? Yes, Seher, go ahead.
So the three conditions are: first, the customer simultaneously receives and consumes the benefit while the entity while the entity discharges the performance obligation. Second is that the entity performs performs to create or enhances the asset such that the customer controls as the asset is created or enhanced. And the third is that the entity's performance does not create an asset with an alternative use to the entity, and the entity has an enforceable right to payment for performance completed to date.
Okay, very good. You have no reason to be worried about, Seher. आपने कितना अच्छा आंसर दिया. And if a performance obligation is not satisfied over a period of time, then it must be satisfied at a point in time. When will performance obligation get satisfied at a point in time? When there is a transfer of control. Can you tell me the indicators for transfer of control? Sameer, बता सकते हो indicators for transfer of control?
Yes, sir. So there has to be physical possession of asset should be transferred to the customer. The
Okay.
legal title should be transferred. There has to be a right to payment which has been established. Physical possession rights to establish. Customer should have accepted the asset.
Hmm.
The significant
Right.
risk and rewards of ownership of the asset is with the customer.
Significant risk and reward is with the customer. Now, can you tell me, Sameer, is it necessary to fulfill all conditions, one condition, four conditions? Has something like this been told to you by the accounting standard कि इतने condition fulfill करने हैं?
No, sir. It is not specifically specified
Very
how
good. The
many to
accounting
be.
standard has not told us कि यार इतने conditions fulfill करो, right? एक बार quickly go through the three conditions that Seher mentioned for satisfied over a period of time. Then we'll see satisfied at a point in time. उसके बाद we have to discuss about percentage completion as well. देख लिया? अच्छा, you have to check whether the performance obligation is satisfied over a period of time first. Then you should go and check the point in time वाला condition. ठीक है, पहले इसको disprove करो and then go ahead with that one. Okay, not otherwise. And if you want to see whether a performance obligation is satisfied at a point in time, you have to first of all verify whether there has been a transfer of control. Okay, you want to verify whether there has been a transfer of control. These are the five conditions you should be looking out for. Entity has a present right to payment. The customer has legal title to the asset, entity has transferred physical possession, the customer has significant risk and reward of ownership, and the customer has accepted the asset. Basically, control means the ability to decide the use of that particular asset. In a lot of questions, this will be an important part in your answer. आपको क्या check करना है कि whether the control, that is, whether the other party now has the right to whether the other party now has the right to decide how to use that particular asset. ठीक है. अब in a lot of cases the question will say that the seller, that is you have the right to ask for the return of goods at any point in time, or the customer also has the right to return the goods to you at any point in time. If the customer has a right to return the goods to you at any point in time, then control has not passed on to the other party. Correct. So ये agent principal relationship वाले questions में बहुत बार आता है. Another situation that you will run across is, we have done two questions like this where there is a right to repurchase in the original agreement. ठीक है. If the right to repurchase is at the fair value, whether right to repurchase is at a certain fixed value, उस पे depend करेगा whether the control has passed on to the other entity or not. ठीक है. I think we have a question quite similar to this one when we were discussing the study text also, and there is one question in the exam kit also. We'll have a look at it. I think कोई वो factory lease वाला type question था ना, if I'm not mistaken, where the factory is sold and there is a right to repurchase. It is at a certain price. There is one question. We'll discuss it today quickly. Now, to check how much of the work is done, you could either use the input method or the output method. The output method will be a survey of performance or how much time has lapsed. The input method will be, you will have to check out of the total expected cost that you thought you would incur, how much amount has been incurred till date. So that is the test to determine how much of the work is complete. Okay. Now, this was the fifth step. Again, the accounting standard does not specifically tell you कि यार इतना out of these 5 conditions, 4 conditions must be fulfilled or 3 conditions must be fulfilled. ऐसा कहीं पे भी नहीं है. ठीक है. Now let's talk about consignment sale. Consignment sale में basically there is an principal agent relationship. The agent holds the goods on behalf of the principal. He doesn't own the goods. When he sells the goods to the final customer, he will collect the money from the final customer, keep his share, and remit the remaining money to the आपका principal, that is the original seller. Okay, so there are a couple of conditions that you need to fulfill for consignment sale. Can someone tell me what those conditions are? Key indicators for consignment sale? नहीं याद? No problem. Yes, Trisha.
So the first indicator is the entity can require the return of the product, or the product is controlled by the entity until a certain event happen. And the last is the dealer has no unconditional obligation to pay for the product.
Okay, very good. Now, consignment sale basically is that you have only transferred the goods to the consignee. He is holding them on your behalf. He is not the owner. He is not obliged to pay you. He is obliged to pay you only when he sells the goods to the final customer. That is the consignment relationship. Now, one very important aspect in IFRS 15 is the sale and repurchase wala part. Naturally, we don't have time to go through all of sale and repurchase, but back in the day, we had made a flowchart, something that I was very happy with to begin with. तो ये flowchart हम अभी quickly revise करते हैं. It will take care of the sale and repurchase वाला part. ठीक है. Entity sells goods and has the obligation to repurchase or right to repurchase, and it is probable that the right will be exercised. ठीक है. Either obligation to repurchase or right to repurchase, and it is probable that the right will be exercised. Such a transaction is not accounted for as sale. ठीक है. Is the repurchase price greater than the original selling price? If the answer is yes, treat this as a financing arrangement. If the repurchase price is less than the original selling price, treat it as a lease. ये वाला फ्लो चार्ट आप कब यूज करेंगे? When entity sells goods and it has an obligation to repurchase or a right to repurchase. ठीक है. Now, second situation is entity sells the goods and the entity has an obligation to repurchase only if requested by the customer. So customer के पास put option है. Is it probable that the customer will sell back to us? If the answer is yes, then go down this path. Check करो if repurchase price is greater than original selling price. If the answer is yes, treat it like a financing arrangement. If the answer is no, treat it like a lease. And entity sells goods and the customer has a put option. Is it probable that the customer will sell back to us? If the answer to this is no, then account for the contract as if it were sale with a right to return. I think one of the questions that we did in the last week was based on this specific part. है ना? Put option is with the customer and we'll have to verify whether it is probable that the customer will be selling back the item to us or not. Now, when it comes to contract modification, a contract modification is a change in the scope of the contract. It should be accounted for as a separate contract if the scope of the contract increases because of the addition of distinct goods or services and the price increases by an amount that reflects the standalone selling price of the additional goods or services. ठीक है, एक बार just go through the example here. Should I scroll? If not accounted for as a separate contract, the modification will be accounted for as the termination of the existing contract and the creation of a new one. If the remaining goods are distinct from the goods transferred before the modification, the transaction price for this new contract is the total of the original consideration unrecognized and the additional consideration promised from the modification. And part of the original contract, ये अलग situation है. एक बार इसका एग्जाम्पल पढ़ो, द स्टोरी दैट वी हैव बिल्ट.
Done, sir.
Okay, and part of the original contract if the remaining goods and services are not distinct from those transferred before the modification and so form a part of the single performance obligation. इसमें we talk about that modification of painting, modification of sofa wala example where it is the same old performance obligation. What can you tell me about a bill and hold arrangement? Who can tell me? Vakas, can you tell me? अच्छा ये तो लाइब्रेरी में होगा. Ankita, can you tell me something about a bill and hold arrangement? Vishrut, can you tell me something about a bill and hold arrangement?
Yes, sir. Bill and hold arrangement is such that we have billed for a particular product, but customer has a request to retain the physical possession with us and not with the customer. So the custody of the product will be remaining with us and not the customer.
Okay. And it is done at the request of the
Of
customer.
the customer.
Otherwise, there is no bill and hold arrangement. ठीक है. The customer should have requested the arrangement. The product must be identified as belonging to the customer. Product must be ready for physical transfer, and the entity cannot have the ability to use the product or sell it to someone else. If I remember it right, इसमें we had seen the example of television set in a electronics shop, उसपे वो sticker लगाया and all of that. That was the example we had gone in for. That's pretty much all that IFRS 15 has to offer. Let's quickly think about IFRS 16. IFRS 16 में how when you are identifying a lease, can you tell me the 4 ingredients that are necessary to identify a lease? Priya, 4 ingredients for identifying a lease.
Yes, sir. It conveys the right to control of an identified asset for a period of time in exchange for consideration.
In exchange for consideration, and the customer controls the asset if he has the right to substantially all of the assets economic benefits, and he has the right to direct the use of the asset. Now even if the lessor puts certain restrictions, that does not mean that the control has not passed on. Okay, now in lease accounting we calculate a right of use asset and a lease liability. Who can tell me how is the amount of lease liability calculated? Simrose.
Yes, sir. So we'll calculate the present value of the payments. In that we'll add the fixed payment and the amount of the residual value guarantee and option if there is at the end of the lease term if there's an option to purchase and it is certain that the option will be exercised, so we add that amount. And if there is termination penalty and if it is certain that that will not be exercised, so that is added.
Very good. And if you are calculating the right of use asset, how is the right of use asset ka value calculated? Harsha?
We'll take the present value of the initial lease payments then we'll add any direct costs that are paid by the lessee, and we'll add the present value of the decommissioning costs as well, and we'll also include the lease payments that have been paid before or at the lease date.
Inception of the lease. Correct.
Inception lease date.
I
Yes.
think that is one of the most important items when you are calculating the right of use asset. Lease liability plus any amount that was paid for lease before the inception or at the time of inception. इसको अगर आप total करेंगे तो you will get the right of use asset. Very good. Now, there is a small difference in the calculation depending on whether the lease rentals are paid at the beginning of the period or whether they are paid at the end of the period. Okay. Now, tell me something. What do you mean? How do you define lease term? Jayani, how do you define lease term?
So any non-cancelable periods,
Mhm.
any periods where it is certain that that extension that the extension will be exercised to the lease, and any period where in case of termination where it will not be exercised.
Very nice. Then how is depreciation calculated on the right of use asset? Is there some rule there as well? Trisha? Can you tell us how exactly is depreciation calculated for right of use asset? कुछ denominator में आप क्या लेंगे? मैं बता देता हूँ. Can someone tell me quickly?
It will be on the shorter of useful life and lease term.
Brilliant. Shorter of useful life and lease term. Okay. चलो एक बार आपको ये फटाफट पढ़वा देते हैं. How to calculate liability, how to calculate right of use asset and everything. ठीक है? Start reading from the top.
Sir, did you call my name? I had network issues, so
No
couldn't
problem.
unmute myself.
No problem. No problem. Tell me when you want me to scroll. देख लो right of use asset. देख लिया?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
ठीक है. लीज टर्म एंड डेप्रिसिएशन वाला पार्ट देख लो. Chalo. When you have to separate the components of a lease, you will do it in the proportion of the standalone selling prices of the lease and the non-lease component. Now, if there is a relaxation given by IFRS 16, which will give you the flexibility to not apply lease accounting in certain specific cases. That is especially applicable when you are talking about low value assets or you are talking about short-term leases. Short-term leases are usually leases of 12 months or less, and आपका low value assets are basically your tablets, small personal computers, telephones, and all of that. Now, when it comes to reassessment of a lease liability, that is basically changes to certain aspects of the lease arrangement. Now, these changes could be the lease term changes, so there is modification that is happening, or the entity's assessment of an option to purchase the underlying asset that changes, or the lease rental charges undergo a change. If that part of the lease is getting modified, okay. So what if you are modifying or changing some part of the lease arrangement, what you will do is you will recalculate the amount of lease liability on that particular date, and whatever is the difference, you will record the difference in the lease liability, and the corresponding difference should be recorded in the right of use asset. Let me show you an example to illustrate that. ठीक है, ये देखो एक बार reassessment of lease liability.
So the another term for this concept is lease modification, right?
I beg your pardon.
The another term for this concept, that is reassessing lease liability, is also called as lease modification, right?
Yes, because a major part of the lease is undergoing a change. Earlier, the lease was for 3 years, now it is for 6 years. So there is change, there is modification to a part of the lease.
Okay, so thank you.
Most welcome. And यहाँ पे whatever is the difference in the present value of lease payments, whatever that difference, you incorporate that in the lease liability, corresponding impact you will have to give in the right of use asset. ठीक है?
Yes.
Lease modification में ना actually there are quite a lot of things, they are not there in our SBR syllabus. बहुत और भी कुछ चीजें हैं इसमें. IFRS 16 as a concept has quite a lot, but luckily उन्होंने हमारे सिलेबस में उतना नहीं रखा है.
So why do they not include all the things or may exclude majority of this?
Very difficult to answer that. बहुत नहीं रखा है, मतलब बहुत ही सुपरफिशियल तरीके से स्टैंडर्ड्स कवर किए हैं. अब बीच में somebody asked me to record only leases and revenue for CA final. तो मुझे उसमें ही 15-15 घंटा, लीज में तो मुझे कम से कम 15 to 17 hours लगे. रेवेन्यू में तो इट टुक मी अराउंड 25 hours टू रिकॉर्ड ऑल ऑफ रेवेन्यू विदाउट स्टूडेंट क्वेश्चंस, बिकॉज वो सिर्फ एक रिकॉर्डिंग करके देना था. बट they just touch the tip of the iceberg and move on here, unfortunately. We'll have one more session on Sunday, okay? Tomorrow I don't have time, but we'll keep a session on Sunday. Maybe, something like a 3 to 6, for example. उसमें जो भी और कुछ होगा, like financial instruments or, anything else, we'll take it up at that time. Finished reading?
Yes.
increase the right of use asset or the lease liability. Now let anything change. Let the lease term change, let the rental change, let the discount rate change, let anything change. This is how you are going to tackle such a modification or change in the terms. Okay. Now, one important point that you need to remember from the lessor's point of view. Okay, whenever there is a sale and lease back, if the sorry, from the lessee's point of view, not lessor, whenever there is a sale and lease back and the transaction is recognized as a sale, then in that situation, when transfer is a sale, you will record the following entry: bank account debit, amount received, lease liability credit, PV of lease rental, machine credit, carrying amount of asset transferred, and right of use asset will be debited with carrying amount of asset transferred into PV of lease rental upon fair value of asset transferred, and balancing figure will go to P&L. Now, if the transfer is not a sale, it will be treated like a financial liability, and if the amount of if the fair value of the asset is more, then the difference is recorded as a financial liability and it is shown separately. If you remember Benito company wala question, Benito company has sale and lease back, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. From lesser standpoint, सारा कुछ same होगा, but instead of showing lease liability, you will show net investment in the lease. And instead of showing finance cost, you will have finance income in that case. Okay. The segregation between a finance lease and an operating lease is based on certain conditions. Again, IFRS 16 has not told us at any point in time whether kitne conditions satisfy karna hai. That IFRS 16 has not told us. Let's have a quick look at the conditions that need to be satisfied for classifying a lease as a finance lease. The lessee has an option to purchase the asset at a value which is less than its expected fair value on the date the option becomes exercisable. The lease term is for a major part of the asset's economic life. At the inception of the lease, the PV of lease payment amount amounts to at least substantially all of the fair value of the leased asset. Iska numerical example we have. The leased assets are of such a specialized nature that only the lessee can use them without major modifications being made. Lessee will compensate the lessor for their losses if the lease is cancelled. Gains or losses from fluctuations in fair value of the residual amount fall on the lessee, and the lessee can continue the lease for a secondary period for lease rentals which are substantially lower than the market rentals. इनमें से if a majority of the conditions are fulfilled or the essence of a finance lease is fulfilled, then you classify that as a finance lease. ये classification किसके लिए important है? ये classification सिर्फ lessor के लिए important है, not for the lessee. Naturally, because this is a revision or a rapid revision, not even a revision, and we are 4 days away from the paper. Naturally, we don't have the time right now to get into the details of why these conditions lead to classification of a lease as a finance lease. वो हमने 6th of April को कर लिया था, right? Which now feels like many years ago. Okay, चलो